All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for LinkedIn Live. Ask Me Anything with myself, Josh Girvin, the CEO of O3. For those of you who don't know me, I'm CEO of O3 and I'm actively involved in the CII community. Led a couple of different co-chaired a couple of different groups, joint working groups, and committees there, and been in the industry for about 15 years. So, who's O3? O3 is a modern web-based or SaaS software platform built specifically around advanced work packaging and agile best practices. So, focused on the construction space and advanced work packaging and agile. Some of our clients are roughly split evenly between owners and EPCs and contractors, from some of the largest projects in the world, tens of billions of dollars, down to portfolios of small cap brownfield projects with sub-$1 million projects being managed as a program or portfolio at existing facilities. In terms of the software solution, it is a platform that goes across the entire life cycle of a project. So we have different modules or solutions that line up with the different phases of the project. On target is our Agile project management or digitalization, construction digitalization tool. So this is a project management core action tracking and management tool that allows you to move from spreadsheets and things like that into a purpose-built tool that really helps you to manage that throughout the life cycle of the project. On plan is for front-end planning. On design, and that's around on plan is really around setting up the project for A2P success. On design is around delivering value directly to engineering during the detailed design phase of the project. So not just allowing engineering to support advanced work packaging or support work phase planning, but actually adding value directly to engineering, allowing them to take advantage of advanced work packaging and agile practices within engineering. On build is really around the construction automation side or work phase planning, both graphical and non-graphical planning. And then on start side, which is for the startup and commissioning process. So O3 has a set of modules or solutions that go across the entire life cycle of the project. And unlike some other tools that were developed through the acquisition of multiple solutions and then combined together, this has the advantage of being from the beginning architected to be a solution across the entire life cycle. So it's one single data set, one single data architecture, one single user experience, one single flow throughout the entire process. The divisions here are not technical in nature. Those divisions are really for explaining the areas where O3 adds value to the life cycle. So with that introduction of myself and O3, we're going to jump right into some of our questions. And thank you for those who provided some questions ahead of time. We really appreciate those. And if you have additional questions, if you could chime in and throw those in, we would love to answer those as well. I've tried to break this up into kind of different areas so that we could kind of group some of those questions. So digital execution, A2P in the early stages, and engineering and construction, startup commissioning, as well as data to support AWP. So 6 kind of areas to get us to think about some of the questions that we might want to answer. But with that, if we could just go ahead and people could comment those questions in, and we will address those. All right. So if we can go ahead and throw up some of those ones that we've collected ahead of time, while folks are also throwing in some new live ones. Okay. So early stage planning, I don't have a model this early in the project. How can I apply AWP? Sure. So part of this is setting up for AWP success. So you want to get things in place in early planning. You want to understand your AWP master index, your coding structure, how you're going to set up your packaging, what packaging is going to be in place on the project, as well as doing your path of construction. When you get to the path of construction side, you can do things like leveraging a plot plan. So the way I like to think about it is the model is the visualization tool that we're used to within the construction phase of the project. Really, the plot plan serves that same purpose earlier in the project before you have that model detailed out enough to do the 3D and 4D components. So plot plan is a great way for you to visualize and start building out your path of construction, setting up your coding structure, your master index, and ensuring the project's set up for AWP success. How many additional engineers will it take to run the software? Yeah, so this referring specifically to functionality where we're trying to add value directly to engineering through advanced work packaging principles. The reality there is AWP does introduce some things that engineering might not have been doing before. So you're asking them to do some additional things. One example is additional model attribution that perhaps wasn't happening before. But the reality is you can actually reduce some of the effort in engineering by making better communication and better connection to construction. So you can actually, while you may be introducing some things, you may do some more work earlier, particularly earlier in the process. Overall, the better process and the better communication and the better coupling between engineering and construction reduces the burden. So you're proactively addressing challenges opposed to the more firefighting mode, which is less efficient and more costly. So I think in general, you're reducing the footprint. And when you talk about from a software perspective, that's only adding to making that process gain more efficient. So I think the short answer is you're reducing the effort in finding efficiencies. So you're not introducing additional folks. So can constraint management be effective if only the construction contractor uses the software or participates in constraint management? Well, the short answer is anytime you get any portion of the project to do better constraint management, that's a benefit to the project, regardless of who that is. So any constraint management done well is good for the project. So you can definitely get value out of just the construction contractor. But the reality is that this is one of those situations where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? It's a 1 + 1 = 3 situation, which is the constraint management benefits that you get as a construction contractor, plus the constraint management benefits you get of another stakeholder, say the owner participating or another contractor participating. The value you get is not just the value of those two separate contributions, but you also get the value of the fact that they're now collaborating together. And it's really, when you think about it, the greatest inefficiencies on projects come at those interface points where people have to communicate across different organizations or across different disciplines. It's where you're moving outside of one team and you have to coordinate with another team. Those interfaces are where you get a lot of challenges. So the constraint management benefit is even more, it's exponential when you get additional people involved and you have that collaboration. So you get value if anyone does it well, but you get even more. You get this explosion of value when you get a collaboration across all the stakeholders, all participating in that constraint management process together. Do test packages have to be based on IWPs in a one-to-one relationship? The short answer to this is no. In fact, it's common not to have that be the case. Your test work packages are going to be system or subsystem based typically, and your IWPs may go across some multiple systems or subsystems, and your test packages really have to do about how you're setting up for that test condition, and so it's specific to that process. So this definitely is not enforced in the software. And that's true across all of the package types. So when you think about how you position the relationships and associations across different package types within O3, we refer to those generically as XWPs, right? Because we have so many different package types that are built into the solution, and we think of them, generically as this concept of a package that has these different components to it. It has associations to other packages. It has a approval module. It has a constraint management module. It has a scoping module, right? It has a progressing module. So our packages have these different modules. Our XWPs have these different modules to them. But the relationships between those XWPs is not rigidly enforced. We have recommendations, we have best practices, we have templates that you can leverage, and then once you configure those for your own use, you can then make those into templates that you can leverage. But we do not enforce across any of those relationships, because the reality is that you want the solution to be able to meet people where they are in AWP and be flexible to support different processes. So none of that is rigidly enforced, and particularly don't see it done with test packages and IWP because fundamentally those have different scoping approaches that don't overlap one-to-one. So digital execution. So this refers to the use of a tool for what we call agile project management or digital execution or digitalization of the project. So one of the things that we see on projects all the time is the use of Excel sheets or action trackers, and you have all these different action trackers, and they're disparate, and each meeting or team has its own action tracker. Okay, this is my action tracker for this particular meeting, and I'm responsible for that because I'm the meeting leader. And we look at that and open it up really only in that meeting, and then we make updates, right? But it's not a collaborative thing, and that's a real challenge. And when you think about technology organizations, even technology organizations, large ones like a Google, they have tools in place where you can understand the activities and you can understand all the actions. There are tools in place to manage all those activities and tasks in a collaborative fashion. The idea that you would do that in a bunch of disparate systems that's just not scalable. It's not efficient, and so the solution is that you really need a tool in place to manage those actions and those activities. And so if you're at that conclusion, then the question becomes, okay, does it make sense to be using an O3 tool for this? Or I have some other tools maybe that do some tasks and activities like Teams, within my organization, or there are other generic task tracking tools that are not specific to the construction space. And the reason why O3 adds value that's unique here is that it has the context of all of the project built into the solution. So activities and tasks, whether those are constraints or approvals or reviews or whatever it is that the stakeholders need to do, that's within the context of the packages or the equipment or the purchase orders or the requisitions or all the things associated with the project. So there's a project specific context that's extremely valuable there. And then the other thing is that just from an IT perspective, being a SaaS solution, we sometimes clients have trouble sharing tools that are internal to their organization, but with us, making a collaboration environment for the project and giving access is something that's inherent in our approach. So you get the added benefit of having that collaboration where it's not just an activity or task tracking within one organization, but you get the benefit of the sharing and the collaboration and the visibility and transparency across all the project stakeholders and not just individually siloed by organization. So those are the kind of two big ways: project specific context and the ability to have everyone involved in collaborating. So, okay. The question to get, from clients in early stage planning, don't have a budget pre-FID, or the budget, right? There is a budget, but that budget is much smaller. There's a huge increase in budget. It's not this kind of linear process, right? It's this big kind of step function at FID. Right? It's an inflection point in terms of the budget for sure. So how can you incorporate technology? Well, this is an area where O3 adjusted its strategy. So we have adjusted our commercial strategy where now the front end planning technology is significantly lower priced, with the idea being that, hey, this is not going to be a profit center for O3, but it's going to be an opportunity for us to get in, and then we're more likely to have that client post FID continue to invest and utilize our technology. So that's an area where we recognize that we had to adjust our strategy and did change our approach there. So you'll find in our commercial strategy that the front end, the very early, is very inexpensive, and then the cost of the software increases across in line with kind of the way that you think about your investment. So from an O3 perspective, we've aligned the cost of the software with the phases of the project and the relative investment that you see in those. And obviously, pre-FID, the relative investment is much smaller. So that's one way that I would think about it. But then in general, that's one thing that O3 does to recognize this as a challenge. But then the thing that I would think about is people ask themselves the question, well, what if I invest in this technology and then the project doesn't go forward? That's a waste. Right. The way that we think about it is, what if you don't invest in your project and then the project does go forward? Right. So you have to think about it as, hey, yes, I'm gonna put some things in place and I'm gonna make some investment. A lot of AWP in general is this idea that, hey, rather than waiting until the last second, why don't you think about this a little bit earlier? Right. If I were to summarize AWP, it's like, hey, why don't you think about that a little bit earlier? And by putting some more investment up front and setting the project up for success, yes, in some cases, that'll be wasted investment when the project doesn't move forward. But when the project does move forward, you'll be in a better position to have a successful project. And the outcomes of that project, whether that project is successful or not far dwarf the additional investment that you put in the FID for projects that didn't go forward. If a project post FID, if you can positively influence that from being a mediocre project to a successful project, that gain dwarfs all of the investments that you've made in the other projects that that didn't go forward, but you were prepared or better prepared for success. So I think from a strategic perspective in general, it makes sense to invest a little bit more early in this process. And then O3 also recognizes that the financials are just different early in the project and has adjusted our pricing strategy to reflect that lower, smaller budgets pre-FID. Engineering rules and credit are totally different to construction. Can you handle this? Well, the short answer to this, generically, the answer to all of these "can you handle this" questions is yes. And the reason why that's true is because these modules, we put as little predefined or locked in business logic as possible in these modules, including the progressing module, because we understand that there's a lot of different ways in which people do this. And so generically, we want an engine that allows you to do this process of progressing, and that's what we've put in place. And that's available, again, XWP, across our different package types. And so while the underlying engines are the same, on each of these packages, the way that you configure those is completely different, and it's unique to those packages. And it's not only unique to that package, but it could also be unique to that package and that purpose. It could be unique to that package, that purpose, and that discipline. Right? You can get infinitely complex if you have very specific scenarios, and our progressing approach from a technical perspective supports that. That's, I think, is critical, because you have lots of different people that do this in different ways, and progressing is core. If you go onto a job site, right, there's always one data set that I can guarantee you can find, and that's the progress data set, right? Someone's going to, because that's where money is exchanged, people are turning that in, right? So that you always can have that. Every single project, every job site has that progressing piece to it, but they're not all done the same way, right? And so we have to be really flexible about that. So in general, all of our rules of credit are incredibly configurable across all different package types, across different package purposes, across different package purpose disciplines, or any other criteria that makes sense for how you break down that approach to progressing that particular scope of work. Is anyone actually using AWP for scaffolding? Well, I certainly can't speak for the entire industry, but I am aware of folks that are using AWP principles within scaffolding. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about AWP principles for scaffolding, there is a CII group that Andrew Foy was chairing, that produced a joint working group that produced a document, our leading practice or best practice on how to do scaffolding. So I suggest CII, you check that out. A lot of good work went into that process. And there's also some shortened versions of that and some infographics if you want to get just the highlights or executive summary for that. But that being said, am I aware of people who are doing the absolute gold standard that we talked about within the CII process? No, I am not. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I am not aware of kind of the gold standard happening. But I am aware of scaffolding with folks introducing AWP, and really I would say more work-phase planning within scaffolding. So seeing folks who are incorporating scaffold work packages, people who are using that to do multidiscipline packaging across multiple IWPs of different disciplines, managing the scaffold request process, treating scaffolding more of as its own discipline or craft, rather than than just as a support approach. So seeing some of that in place, as well as tying it better into constraint management. So I would say yes, but I would say it's more work-phase planning stage right now on scaffolding, but excited about where that's headed. And there's definitely room that's been defined within that CII best practice for the industry to grow, and I'm excited to see that. Is there a limit to the number of people who can access the files or data using O3? Well, there's a limit in the sense that obviously there's security and you need to have access, but outside of that access needing to be, you do have a username and have the permissions to access the data or files that you're trying to access? The answer to that is no. There is not a limit to that. We have projects with thousands of users. If you're a large project and you're doing constraint management correctly, then you want the constraint management users to be active in the constraint management tool and participating in that process of progressing and updating those constraints. And so it moves from the quarterback model where you have just one person in the tool to a collaborative model where you have lots of people inside of the application. So there is no limit to that, and our solution is scalable, so we can scale up the performance of the solution as needed to support larger organizations. That's not a challenge for us. We haven't met a project yet that was large enough to be an issue, and do not anticipate that being that's not an issue because of the way that we're architected. So there is not a limit. And from a commercial perspective, we think about this as being an important part of the way that you do either O3 or digital execution. It's a real challenge if you don't have everybody involved, right? If you have, or what we also see is that if you sometimes use this tool, so if I'm a project manager at a small cap facility, for example, and I'm managing 10 projects in different stages of their life cycle, if sometimes I'm going into a tool and then the other times I'm going back to my Excel and my other stuff and my physical meetings and whiteboards, and I'm getting away from my, using my tools to track that can be a challenge because you've got people who have to do it in two different ways. And so one of the things we found is that when you're moving an organization from from an older approach, which we see in a lot of the small cap facilities, we see less technology, we see more ingrained kind of fixed approach than we do in the large cap world, where you get lots of turnover and learnings from project to project. We see less of that happen in the small cap. Not always the case, but more ingrained process. And when you need to move from that older ingrained process to, hey, I want to do both a technology change and I want to do a process enhancement with Agile or advanced work packaging, that's a lot of change that has to happen. And so where we've seen some success through a lot of trial and error, certainly, is through moving people first through this kind of digital foundation. So let's get rid of these Excel sheets. Let's take something simple like RFIs that are being done in email today and move them into a tool where everyone can visualize that. And the RFI it automatically does alerts and notifications. You can track, and you get these benefits associated with a purpose-built tool that you don't get with some generic thing like an Excel or something like that. And then you introduce more and more of that, and you get this kind of digital floor where I'm action tracking's happening, my RFIs are happening, that maybe some constraint stuff is happening, basic stuff is happening. And then once you have that in place, then you can incrementally introduce additional process enhancements. And once you have that digital foundation, adding a process enhancement is the cost associated with that from a change management perspective is significantly reduced because you're just configuring within the tool. Right? If everyone's working in this digital world and I want to route something a different way, that's a configuration. Versus if I'm in a analog world and I've got document-centric stamp approach, right? That's really rigid. Changing that is very difficult, right? And so if we get first this kind of digital execution foundation in place, and we tackle it, should be different on the pain point that we leverage to kind of get there, can be different based on different facilities. Sometimes it's RFI, sometimes it's constraints, sometimes it's task management. So whatever it is, we get to that digital execution, get over that hurdle, get people in the tool, and then what we find is people start saying, well, hey, can I do this? Oh, what about that? Because they start to recognize ways that process could be enhanced. And now the technology is being pulled by the users to go further, rather than the technology or the organization trying to push a bunch of change, saying, do this. So if you can kind of get them on that floor, and then you start seeing people kind of saying, hey, I want more, and you're getting pulled. And that change management is a completely different situation when someone's pulling you than when you're trying to push them, right? So it's a totally different scenario. So we see that as being fundamental. You want to get everybody in it. You want to get this digital foundation in place, and then process enhancement becomes so much easier on top of that. Does O3 take the place of my procurement system, or can it tie into it? Yeah, we're not a procurement system. We're not a sophisticated materials management system, right? We have the ability to do some when we talk about procurement, there's a number of systems there, but typically we're connecting into the procurement system so we can understand things around purchase orders, for example, or requisitions, particularly as they relate to long lead equipment or major mechanical equipment. Some of that is critical from our constraint management perspective and a core value. So we definitely are pulling in a lot of that information. But we're not a replacement for procurement system, certainly not going out and actually purchasing. That O3 doesn't move into that space at all. We just connect into that. But from a materials management perspective, we connect in and we tie pretty closely with sophisticated materials management systems. Obviously, materials are a big part of constraint management. So we connect real tight coupling with materials management. If that materials, we typically are the ones that are responsible. We do the scoping, right, of the IWPs, and we pass that data to the materials management system along with the sequencing associated with those. And then the materials management system will feed us back information about whether or not those particular materials are going to be available, or whether they're here, or whether we think they'll be here, and that kind of information. And we can automatically do constraints. If you don't have a materials management system at all, which we see sometimes with specialty subcontractors, maybe your electrical vendor doesn't have it or something, and in that case, they just have some Access database or Excel spreadsheet with material inventory. We can consume that material inventory information, and then we can do our own simple material allocation process that's based purely off of the first come, first serve, based off of the planned start dates of those packages, based off the sequencing of the IWPs within O3. And then we can tell you, okay, this package isn't going to have the materials that it needs, and we can flag that. But that's a simple mechanism for material allocation and forecasting of those constraints. But we typically like to connect in with a more sophisticated materials tool that's focused specifically on that. So when it comes to procurement, we're not in the purchasing business, but we need that information. And when it comes to the materials management side, we do some basic stuff there as needed to make the constraint management process work well, but prefer to be connected into a sophisticated materials management system that can really provide us with all the rich data that we need to do the things we do on the management side. All right. So I think we're going to wrap it up. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope you guys like this format. It's the first time that we've done LinkedIn Live. Thought it was a success. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and look forward to doing more of these. And thank you for coming.